So, gentlemen, thanks so much for being on the podcast again. Instead of traditionally introducing yourselves like you have done so many times before, guys, I want you to tell me a piece of propaganda that you want people to believe about you. Greg, we'll start with you.
Okay, I'm Greg Williams, and I love podcasting. I have overcome my fear of public speaking using podcasting, and I look forward to being asked to appear on podcasts. Brian, however, hates public speaking and is a complete wallflower. So please go easy on him.
I'll do that. All right, Brian.
Oh, that was a good one. Well, all right, everyone. I'm Brian, and in keeping with the subject of the show, I thought of something good. So, because I teach human behavior for a living, my kids are emotionally regulated. They make rational decisions, and they never fall for peer pressure or do anything. In fact, I overheard, the insurgent telling my wife the other day, I really appreciate the boundaries that get set here at home. So, that's my propaganda.
Nice. And just to let everybody know, Brian has a teenager at home. So I'm sure that is exactly how that went. Perfect. Very cool. So, we kind of talk about propaganda. Maybe folks don't quite know what it is. Somebody just give me a good definition of what it is.
I can start, Andy. The propaganda is so commonly misused that most people associate it with inflammatory speech or writing, which has no basis in fact. And yet propaganda is almost always based in fact. And what happens is you take facts and you bend them and you skew them and you represent them in a manner to derive or provoke a desired response. So if you take intentionally or deliberately information and you prejudicially bias it or become misleading in order to promote a specific ideal or point of view, then that's considered propaganda. So using facts to present like an opposing viewpoint, but putting it in an unfavorable light is considered propaganda. And when I talk about prejudicially biased, I want you to think real quick for a minute in a court setting. Certain photos, certain videos can't be shown because they would prejudice the jury. So in other words, if something is me putting my thumb on the scale to make you believe something by using half-truths and full truths, but kind of bending it a little bit. It's like a prism. Light comes into the prism and it bends, and you still got light, but it's kind of a different light than you started with.
Got it.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I would say at a very simple or at the most general level possible, like propaganda is information with an agenda. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean something negative, right? Even in teaching and learning, there's actually, when you're going to school, well, there's information with an agenda, right, in a sense. But what we're talking about with propaganda is, it's designed to get you to feel first and think second. So like Greg said, it's not lies, it's spin, it's maybe some omission, it's a remix of that truth that makes you nod along before your brain catches up. So it kind of hijacks like your emotional GPS, reroutes you before you even check the map. So even with like what I said with my propaganda, right, sounds legit, feels true. I mean, I should have super kids, right? I teach this stuff for a living, but that's the beauty of sort of propaganda, right? It leans on credentials, maybe feeds some expectations, and it skips the messy reality of what it really is. And so it just kind of like, we make decisions based on very, very limited information. And so, propaganda doesn't need to be false. It just needs to be strategic. And when it flatters your assumptions, you rarely stop to question it. So it's just like Greg was saying, anything that it has an agenda. And I look at it as like, it makes me feel first and then think second, because my background and Greg as well, we've had to do some very, very technical research stuff and read a lot of technical reports. And you know what? It's super dry and it's very specific in a very specific manner for a reason. And you have to show everything. Well, that doesn't sell. You know what I mean?
Right.
No one's reading academic papers. They're reading their friends' Instagram posts and watching YouTube clips. So that's the purpose of propaganda.
Yeah, I like both of the definitions. I like, Greg saying this, you're putting your thumb on the scale of, right, trying to tip it towards you. And then Brian, if I feel before I think that's probably a good red flag for people to take away from this is if the the intent is to elicit that emotional response before people can like cognitively really understand and dissect what's going on, then that's probably, hey, we might be being manipulated here for another purpose. What's that purpose, you know?
And it's not even, sometimes it's, it's structured and organized and meant, but sometimes just think about it like we all know someone who's like, who likes to spill the tea, who likes to share what's going on. They come up and go, "Oh, Andy, you're not going to believe this. Guess what? You are not." It's like you're already starting out sensationalizing what I'm about to hear. So you're setting the expectation, and you're not necessarily doing it because you're trying to be manipulative. That's just like who you are in your personality, right? So I look at it at a very low level. We all sort of engage in this, and I look at it as, well, how do I engage in propaganda? Well, I do it with my kids all the time, right? I got to get them to go along with something that they don't want to do. So maybe I'm going to insert something. Maybe I'm going to get them excited about something that there's probably not going to be that excited about when we get there, but now they're going out the door and they're not crying, they're not fighting it, right? So I look at it anytime we talk about something like this, it's like, well, how do I engage in it? And they'll kind of help you understand how it works and when to recognize it.
I think one of the biggest pieces of propaganda that made an imprint on me was I learned in school that this whole thing from George Washington was he cut down this cherry tree and, he says the famous line, "I cannot tell a lie," and he owns up to it, right? I was taught this in school. Now, later in school, I learned that that was not actually true. That wasn't the case. That was a campaign thing that if I remember correctly, George Washington never actually said. Someone else said it of him, but it was just accepted as true really quickly and has kind of lasted.
Yeah, that's and I think as we go along and unpack this, we need to, in future questions, unpack the ruse of information. Information is just data within a context to establish a relevance. And so information is knowledge that we communicate about a particular fact, subject, or event. And it was designed originally, when humans started speaking, to be accurate and free of again, I'll use the term prejudicial bias. What I mean by that is the legal sense of bias, to make you do something, because it was useful for a given purpose, not intended to draw you into something else. Information was just face value. Oh, that's good information. I needed to know that, and now I can act on it. And I love the Supreme Court. And historically, every Supreme Court decision, one of the justices says the question, what purpose does it serve? So I would say information serves the purpose of being data that we can utilize. Propaganda, however, generally serves a purpose, like Brian was saying, that the scientific reports are dull for a reason. So let's pep them up a little bit, using that propaganda. And the cool thing was that they hooked you early with George Washington. It was a dry subject a long time ago, but holy smokes, those were a couple of things that young Andy could get behind.
Yeah, that and I would call that's like an old school version of today we would call that clickbait, right? It's like it's historical clickbait. Yes. And that's kind of the point, though. Propaganda often teaches through stories. Because one, the oldest form of knowledge, skill transfer is oral tradition and stories, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
But spoken language hasn't been around that long. Written language a lot less, and still there's places you can go where people don't know how to write, right? So you have to tell stories, right? So it speaks to us intuitively as humans on how to we get a lot more from a story. So because a story bypasses your logic, you're more willing to suspend some disbelief, right? You got to look at if this story feels too good or too perfect, all right, who benefits if I believe this? Like where is this really going here? And a great one is, most of what you see on like LinkedIn is like clickbait, right? But it's propaganda. I was talking to my 7-year-old and they said, like, there's no 7-year-old said that to you. Like, let me tell you what my 7-year-old taught me about B2B sales. It's like, no, that did not happen. You're making this up. Like, you're doing it to sell your online course or do whatever or get clicks. But that's it. This is not a true story.
Right. And, we do learn from our kids. My son has taught me stuff, or at least he's asked a question that has stumped me plenty of times. But if they give this, rundown of, hey, here's how to, sell, B2B, Dad, that's, probably most likely not going to be true. So you brought up LinkedIn. We have seen like the rise of social media over the, I expect, it's been coming for a long time, but especially since 2020 when we were all locked down, and a lot of us were
Yep.
getting our information from social media. How
Mhm.
has propaganda taken on its own life in looking at social media?
So let me give the historical perspective because I'm
Yeah.
old and social media is new to me. So back on the Saturday matinees, and I'm even before I was around, you used to have newsreels, and the newsreels were how people got information. You'd pay a nickel, you sit in there, see a couple of newsreels, and then your short came on. And most of them were black and white. And I'll give you one during World War II. They were getting folks to gather metal and rubber during the war.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone
Right.
chip in, help our troops, help our country. And the fact is that most of that stuff was thrown away or ended up in a landfill. It was propaganda because we really needed the source metals in real life and other items for the war effort. But realistically, the kid in the neighborhood with the wagon wasn't contributing to the war effort, but it did make people feel good. So the idea was that was a clever use, a very strategic use of propaganda to make everybody pat each other on the back and feel good. Now, while that was going on, the same feel good, every time that they showed somebody, for example, from Japan or showed somebody from Germany, they would skew the cartoon to make them look, insanely, mad and vicious and dangerous. That's how that scale of propaganda goes. We take just enough fact to hook you in, right? And then we misinterpret the information to force you to draw perhaps an unreasonable conclusion.
So I would look at this too as like when people bring it in, it's like, okay, now we've got all the social media. Nothing that we're talking about right now is new. There's actually a great book written by a guy, Tom Standage. He's called "The Writing on the Wall," and said, the first 2,000 years of social media. And so what you can go all the way back is even like, when the Roman Senate came out with some new rules or some new law, they would post them on the wall, right? Well, one, not everyone can read, and two, like that's kind of boring, whatever. So what was popular back then was getting a letter from your friend where they were critiquing or giving their opinion on this new thing, or sharing it with people through letter. So it was a slower version of it, but it's kind of the same thing. And even back to like you can go back to these old restaurants back in Pompeii, and they have like the wine here sucks, and it's like, okay, we call that a Yelp review or a Google review today, but it's the same exact thing. So
Right.
the medium in a sense has changed. It's a lot more, it's in our face a lot more, and we interact with it a lot more. But it's the same concept and it's the same process. And you got to understand too, even conversation and people talking, like
Mm-hmm.
most conversation is non-versation, as Greg would call it, right? It's just like people talking, you get to know the checkout person at the grocery store. How's your day going? Any big plans this weekend? That's actually all very small talk. It's very socially important to a culture
Mm-hmm.
and to anywhere. It's actually, I love it, especially coming back here now to the Midwest. I'm in Minnesota versus California. Everyone's so friendly and nice and talking. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm actually talking to the person who's checking me out now. This is lovely. I love this. You know what I mean? But it gives you a feel for that area. So it's important. But how much of that is really like valuable, important information that I need to know? Maybe like less than 5%,
Right.
so now, since we have so much access to it with social media, like I'm sorry, like most of Instagram is just the same thing over and over again. There's only like 10% of it's any good, but everyone's on it. So you can't have that much information that's that meaningful. It's just not possible. So I always take that historical perspective, like Greg did. It's like, okay, what do we know about it? What's been around? The medium has changed. Now, obviously, like you can get right to my kid through their phone. That's
Mm-hmm.
different. But
Yeah.
but everything we're doing is still the same, just in a different manner.
Yeah, and I appreciate you guys bringing up the fact that this is something that humans have just been doing for a long time, and this is something that we
Right.
all do. Like if I, we're just trying to decide where to go to dinner, I'm going to play up the Mexican restaurant because that's
Yep.
where I want to go. And I think a lot of people don't realize that's what they're doing, and it's not necessarily evil, like you guys are saying, and it's not
Right.
something that we should really be too much ashamed of, as long as our intention is just to get chips and
Yeah.
salsa, that's it,
Exactly.
right? So yeah, so like we all kind of engage in this, and especially like you said on social media. But when I think of propaganda, I usually think of like stuff that is pushed out by political parties or like historically by governments. Greg, you brought up the stuff about the World War II effort, which, by the way, I sitting here right now didn't realize that a lot of that stuff wasn't actually used for the war effort. I had, of course, seen the reels and all that sort of stuff. So there's something else that's something else I've learned today.
Thank George Washington for that one, Andy.
I will. I'll thank George Washington for that.
Yeah.
Cool. So what's the danger of people being susceptible to propaganda that is pushed out by a larger entity, like maybe a political party, a government? When does this need to become concerning for people?
So again, I'll go back to history. Before Gutenberg, your information was likely from a town crier, because the government and the church regulated who could read and what information that the common citizen could possess. If you were found with a book, that could be a death sentence, right? So information historically has become easier for the common citizen to access. And so the information presented then started becoming deliberately influenced to make people shift or think in a certain way, believe certain things, buy or avoid a certain item. So it's an extension, because like even the repeat of keywords or phrases, that's very telling to me. And yes, you can use propaganda for good. There's no long-term problem if you're doing that. So I think that's an important place to start.
Yeah, politics are always a great one to talk about. A lot of the stuff, it's just kind of hard for people to do it because we're kind of entrenched in our different beliefs. And like, I'm completely nonpartisan when it's stuff. I mean, people always come up to us and ask about different politicians and this, and I go, look, this isn't coming from a judgment standpoint. I'm just telling you what this indicates and what this person's good at and what their behavior means. It doesn't mean anything about their policies, but that's such a great one, because you have to get people to vote, because I have to get you, excited to get out and go do something that's going to benefit me. So I got to make it think it's benefit you. And the easiest way is just to get you to hate the other side. It's the simplest way to build up a base of people, a group. And because now I'm feeling like I have to choose here. So I have to make a choice, and it's binary, when really most political issues aren't, at least the serious ones. Like, well, there's a lot that people agree on, but that doesn't work for getting people out to vote. No one does hey, I think, the other candidate across the aisle here has some great points, and that might work, but I think this. No one does that. They're like, oh, that's going to take away this. They're going to do. I mean, because it makes it divisive and makes it like it benefits them as a politician. It gives them the power, right, to get elected, to do whatever they're trying to do. And that's just become how it is, but it's kind of always been that way with politics. Right. And so it's always a great one to look at, because you'll see the messaging behind stuff, and you look at the messages that get repeat. And some people are more natural at it than others, like our current president, Donald Trump. Like, don't care what you think about him, but like, he has excellent comedic timing. That's why like comedians are like, this guy is hilarious. Like, whether you think the joke was funny, his timing and the way that he does stuff. And like when he would talk about like crooked Hillary, well, that's interesting, because I don't even have to see that. I can hear it. And it's like, yeah, you're crooked. Like it's very powerful in the messaging. This is why they'll repeat stuff. And when they think something's working, they'll keep doing it over and over again. And now that sticks in your head, and then over and over again. So now that's what I always hear. So those little things are always examples of propaganda that can be very powerful and that can work. And you know what? It just gets in the way of you looking deeper into the issues, because especially when it comes to politics, these are complex issues, right? Policies that are going to affect the entire United States, they play out differently, and they don't always play out, how you think they're going to. So they're very, very complex, and they're hard. They're really hard problems. But if I can't get in there and have that conversation about everything. So we can't have all these nuanced conversations, not enough time. So what do? Let's just make it easy. Let's make it easy. And we'll have the party line. We'll have this, and you'll start to hear stuff come out from different politicians from different areas. And then you go, oh, that's the party line they came up with. They're going to refer to that issue as this. And then it frames how you think about it. And that's normal. Again, it's how we do stuff. It's how I do stuff with my kids. It's like, hey, we're going on an adventure. Not we're going to go sit in the car for 3 hours. You know what I mean? Like, I can say we're going on an adventure, because that sounds way more fun than we're not moving for the next 3 hours in the back seat.
Gotcha. To that end too, Andy, when Brian was talking about Pompeii and the graffiti, the idea is it didn't matter. What mattered more than the graffiti was the intent. For example, the guy wasn't
Yes.
trying to tell you, hey, save your money, the wine sucked here. The guy was likely trying to drive you to the bar across the street, so that guy who pays him to go around and advertise through graffiti got his way. And
That's a
so
great point.
those sort of propaganda becomes a social imperative.
Right. I wanted to key off something that Brian said a minute ago. He said it's easier for me to get people to hate the other side, and because that's just the simplest and easiest thing to do. But that's also like a very primal thing, right? That speaks to
Mhm.
our primal brains as humans. It's like, the basic stuff of, like, Greg, I've heard you say so often, talking about how we still use our primal brains today, and hate is one of those elements, right?
Absolutely.
It is, and what if I think about it, something that's very primitive. So you have your limbic system that's kicking, right? It's trying to keep you alive. It's trying to keep the human race alive. It's so primitive. We don't ever think about it. We don't notice it until maybe we get overwhelmed by events or emotion or something, right? And it's this thing that's just constantly filtering all of the information that you take in. It first, think of it, it has to bypass your limbic system to go, is this going to hurt me? Is this going to kill me? Is this going to hurt my family? You don't even realize this is happening. And so one of the survival mechanisms humans had to adopt a long time ago was like, hey, that looks a little bit different, or I don't understand that. And the last person, got killed by something that they didn't understand, right? So I'm going to fear that. I'm going to stay away from it. And that's just how we're sort of primed to be and think. And so it is easier to say, hey, they're different than you, right? They're not the same as us. They think differently. They want different things. So now I'm like, well, you're going to take away my life. You're going to take away. So now it's a very primitive response for me, which is why when we talk about with human behavior, and you know this, you've been through some of our training before, and is like one of our first principles are people are the same all over the world. So look for the similarities, not the differences. Because if you go around looking for the differences in different people, you're going to find them. Well, if you go around looking for the similarities, you're going to find them. And then you're going to go, wow, this is a little bit more complicated than I thought.
Right.
And if you go back again in history and you take a look at Aesop's fable, you take a look at the Bible, you take a look at some of the great literature or orators that were around there, it was all about co-opting friends because we can make it through the winter. Listen, I'll stash these things and you stash those. Or the city and the country, hey, listen, we do it this way. Oh, that makes a lot of sense. The idea was that it was a smaller group of people that you could touch, and you were trying to promote survival. And so anytime it was outside of that group that you could physically touch, or you could, maybe run for an hour to the end of that village, everything within that perimeter you knew about. So any new information was suspect. Any new way of doing things, how did that end up for those people in Salem? You know what I'm saying? And now all of a sudden, goody so-and-so, it says, oh yeah, and I saw her flying with the cow through the window because the crops died. We come up with stuff that is so crazy and outlandish to explain those things that we don't always understand. So it's easy to determine, or understand rather, that your brain is going to go to the worst possible case scenario rather than embrace openly everybody that comes. Look what the Native Americans did at Roanoke when, everybody, hey, it's a wonderful time. Hey, here, take these blankets, and everybody died. So the thing about being suspicious is a survival mechanism. And suspicious means that my guard is up, and my guard is up means my hands are up and my fists are up, and I may be ready to fight.
Yeah, great stuff there. As you were talking about that, I started to think about, there are entire people groups on planet Earth right now who the only information they get comes straight from the government. And that leads me to remember Plato's allegory of the cave, and how, like, an entire group of people can be kind of coerced into the same thinking. On a large scale, how does that affect a populace, and how does that affect an individual? And do you really have to be a mastermind to do that sort of stuff?
No, so let me just give two definitions to make sure that we're on the right track, and I'll pass it to Brian. One, misinformation just means that you're stating or relating something that's not true. But most of the time, it's not intentional. It's not deliberate. It's just you're wrong or mistaken. And I know a lot of people that pass misinformation because they're knuckleheads and they don't educate themselves and they believe horse crap that they see, without confirming the source. So what we're really talking about there, I think the line is disinformation, because disinformation is intent. It's intentionally disseminating deliberately false information. So if the media knowingly posts a false story, if the government knowingly posts a false story, and the intent of that story is to influence you or your opinion, then that's disinformation. And that's the stuff that Brian and I rail against most often is, you've heard physician heal thyself. Well, citizen educate thyself. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, and to kind of to your point of like, do you have to be a mastermind? Well, you do if you want it to be effective, but it's very very hard to do, right? Like what's the saying? You can fool some of the people some of the time, but you can't fool all the people all the time. And it's true. And time is the biggest kind of what will show what plays out and what doesn't. Because the other part of everyone's saying, oh, we're getting bombarded with information, all the social media, and there's propaganda. It's like, yeah, but you also have the ability now to actually look into that and to figure out what happened. I mean, there's a digital trail to everything now. So it's like you dig hard enough, like, oh, wait a minute, that's not exactly what happened. They're kind of conflating these things. But what it's too kind of hard to do that as humans. So when it comes to anything that's coming down, everyone wants to think, oh, it's a psyop, it's this, and everything's connected to that. And it's like, look, do you have any idea how much organization that takes to pull something like that off? It's really, really hard. The only people that can do it are in like controlled environments. So I'll go back to, and Andy, you know this, I'm a big Taylor Swift fan. Her new album just dropped today, so I started listening to that this morning. But she deliberately in music videos will foreshadow future albums, will make like these hidden things like on stage that are going, that's like a hint to her audience, like, oh, there's something coming up. And she ties everything back to this narrative from 2 albums ago, finishes a song here. Well, she can do that because she completely controls the narrative. It's her world, it's her music, it's her production. Well, a government can't do that. I mean, or can only sustain that for so long. So a lot of times when something is propaganda, it's found out that it's propaganda, or it doesn't have the full effect that it can. Because again, like over time, it's very hard to control the narrative and stay on top of it for especially in today's landscape. You know what I'm saying? Someone's ready to call out anything.
I would agree with Brian to a point. I would say the reason that repressive regimes have to be repressive and have to have militaries that force people down, and like for example, last week our friends in Afghanistan, the Taliban, decided to unplug the internet. Why? Because people were asking too many questions, doing too many things, and it's better to control the flow of information. You look at North Korea. You will believe this. This is the party line, or it may cost you, your life. So that's why those regimes have to be that way, because exactly what Brian's saying. It's easy to pull that curtain back and say, holy shit, it's, pardon my language, it's the Wizard of Oz back there, and he's the one ringing the bells and doing all the work, right? So in this day and age, it's much easier to find that out. So guess what? Those regimes have to be more forceful. They have to limit, more information. And that goes back to, the Gutenberg knocking on the church, right? I mean, we go back to that. What happened before that? They had to control the information, or you might ask questions, and those questions might not be in service to the realm, right?
Right. Yeah, and good point with all of that. Kind of give me some examples of some historic propaganda that has either been good or bad that we can kind of take a look at.
So I am an apologist when it comes to my German heritage, because everybody in my German side was in the war, in World War I and II, and they were fighting for what they thought was the homeland, because they didn't have a lot of stuff, and you know what? They believed the propaganda. So my family was born and raised in a little cow town. Coburg is the joke. Cow Berg town of Königsberg in the middle of Bayern. And so their information was when somebody came through on a wagon and told them what was happening in other towns. So they were want to believe that, because this educated person that had nicer clothes and had a horse was coming in and telling them, man, this is coming and it's bad. And so then they were recruited with their brothers and sisters and uncles to fight a war that they thought was going to solve and end all wars. And here comes World War II. And you get a compassionate speaker, and he gets up in front of people and he puts people in power that starts laying out breadcrumbs where you start discovering things which they had masterfully created years before. And all of a sudden it's like, wow, that fits like a glove. And so those theories start becoming a reality in your mind. And that's when they become most dangerous. When you start believing it and then you start repeating it, now guess what? Your family doesn't have a choice, right? They don't even have a chance to think in a different manner. So I think World War II is probably a real good example of that, and specifically how the National Socialists conveyed their opinions. And there's one, and Goebbels was great at it. It's the big lie. It doesn't matter how big the lie is. If you repeat it enough, people will start believing it.
That's a great one.
Yeah.
I'll give one that's a little bit more, I guess, used in a good way, in a sense, for me growing up. And I make jokes still to this day with Greg, because he's got bears that live up by him, and I remember, Smokey the Bear. Only you can prevent forest fires. It's like so simple. It had a message, an emotional hook, a catchy visual of the bear, and so like it was an effective way to do things. And then
True.
because of that, and then watching the cartoons with Yogi Bear, and I always tell Greg when he sends me, hey, we got another bear out by our place in Colorado. I'm like, well, as far as I know, they just like to, they don't want to start any forest fires, and they're just going to steal picnic baskets. So if you just leave a picnic basket out for them, it's that kind of effective thing. But it's like the Smokey the Bear, those things are like effective propaganda. Even like you can look at different marketing examples as well. Remember, like So Simple, a caveman could do it, and they had the Geico guy, and he's like, what? And it was so effective and so great that stuff stuck around. You know what I mean? And so those are kind of effective uses of propaganda that are mostly just used to sell a product or an idea that's generally safe, or not something that has any evil intent behind it.
Right. So it sounds like just in marketing, kind of like, is there really a difference between marketing and propaganda? Or is it all kind of tied together?
Well, that's a great question. And the idea, again, comes down to intent on my side.
Yep.
Because, like, for example, Brian and I were in Atlanta a couple of weeks ago and in Missouri last week. And my computer is also used as a projector for a lot of the stuff that we do. So what happens is the night that I checked into the hotel, I was getting Temu, and it said, hey, this cat head, Halloween ornament is really hot outside of Atlanta. And I was like, okay, well, I'm from Gunnison, right? Well, then when I was in Missouri, it was like, hey, that same issue, but outside of Columbia, Missouri. And then when I got back home, it was, hey, that cat head thing is really hot in Gunnison. The idea is that they know that they don't have to be completely truthful. It's not the biggest seller. The Gunnison doesn't have the gated retirement communities, but all they got to do is put it out there because there's no watchdog. There's really nobody. Like, for example, why are commercials louder than the rest of the show? There's no watchdog out there regulating that. And therefore, what happens is advertising is a perfect chance to try something and get a hook out there. What, like, hey, here's a legal loophole on these pills. If you just hit this button, we all know it's horse crap, right? But we fall into it. And my astute partner, Brian, would call that, guess what, clickbait. And clickbait is called clickbait because it works. And you know what? They wouldn't be using it every day if it didn't work.
Yeah, there's and just it goes back to what Greg's saying. It's all about intent. So propaganda, and kind of marketing. There's a lot of similarities because you're trying to get someone to buy something. Now, whether it's buying an idea, buying a product, but that's, you're trying to get someone to buy into something. Just like I'm trying to get my kids to buy into, hey, it's awesome to clean your room and to pick up around the house, right? Like, no, it's not. It sucks. But if but if I can get them going along, it's like, oh, this is just a normal thing. Yeah, everyone does this. Okay, now that propaganda, I'm trying to set them up for success. My intent is pure, right? I'm trying to help them, help the house, help us, right? So that's just the difference is what is the intent. But either way, I just look at it as like, what are you trying to get me to buy here? what
Exactly.
thought, what belief, what product, whatever it is, you're trying to get me to buy something. And that's, if I look at it from that perspective, it kind of it helps me see what's propaganda and what's just good information.
Right.
And I would call back to Brian's favorite, the person on the side of the road with the brand new gas can that's still got the price tag on it, and they're saying, "Hey, can I just have a couple of bucks for fuel?" What are they selling? What's their intent? It's a deliberate act of disinformation that borders on propaganda. The idea is that, hey, look, man, I'm a little down on my luck. Help out. And right now, somebody listening to your podcast, and he's going, "Oh, you heartless bastard! Why don't you just give him a buck?" I don't give him a buck because I'll give you a hand up, but I'm not giving you a hand out. So there's a very fine line, and we have to be careful because we invent new words, and that doesn't make us smarter. It actually takes us back and makes us dumber. So when somebody says that, I heard that one again, the imposter syndrome. No, imposter syndrome is just you not being sure of yourself. So you got to build your confidence. You got there somehow, but by naming it imposter syndrome, I can point to it and make a sticky note, or have that cat saying "hang in there" and hang it on my wall. So same thing here. The fine line between propaganda in advertising is definitely intent in my estimation.
Yeah, I agree. And you guys talk about intent so much, and that has really helped me to understand like what's going on.
Yeah.
Just generally in my life, like, hey, what's the intent of this person? What's going on? You really do have to. You have to think a lot in life, and I think a lot of us just sometimes we just don't want to think. We just want to kind of, hey, we're going to want to go with the flow and things like that. So, like as we wrap up here, we've talked about so many cool things here. What are some of the red flags of propaganda that we need to try to spot and understand to just critically think, not necessarily get out of it, but just understand the message?
So that's a great question, Brian. If you let me go first, I would tell you this. I would say trust but verify. Always confirm your sources. Check your sources with other sources and consider the intent. And what I mean by that is most of the time somebody wants their say, not their way. And I would ask you to think back in your own life, Andy. They're probably going to be okay. It's when somebody demonstrates the intent to want their say and their way, that's when you're in trouble. And that's when you're in trouble on a phone call, in person, in the drive-through line, walking through the parking lot. So if you think that way, this is a perfect episode for that, because what they're portraying, that propaganda, or on the deliberate and false side, the disinformation, is meant to get a reaction out of you. It's meant to slow your roll or to drive your attention elsewhere. Now, if we're doing that and that happens to be a magician on the street in Las Vegas, all good. You get what I'm trying to say? I want to be entertained. But if all of a sudden that's a person that's coming into the classroom and I haven't seen this person before and I don't see their ID tag, hey, maybe their portrayal is taking that propaganda and going that step further to disinformation, and it's meant to cloud my judgment and slow me down. So anytime somebody wants their say, probably okay. Anytime somebody wants their say and their way, even in an advertisement, I'm probably going to be suspicious about that.
Well said.
Yeah. And I look for, if is it all heat and no light, right? Is there, is it all emotion and very low on the fact scale? Is it all, I got to have this huge compelling story, or where's the data behind it? Because if you're coming in and automatically trying to get me to feel a certain way, that's already right there. I'm like, okay, what's going on here? Right. Well, you're attempting to contextualize this information in an emotional manner. Well, maybe there's not a lot of info there. Maybe there isn't, because if it's really good information and you tell that story how it was told, like it should, if it's that important, it will be emotional to me. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. But if you're having to start with that, then that's huge a red flag for me. Like Greg said, you can always check sources or look at the other side. I mean, that's the beauty of it, is like I used to tell people, oh, we have a Republican president, so I'm going to watch CNN. Oh, we have a Democratic president, I'm going to watch Fox News. Why? Because that's where I'm going to get the criticism from. Like, I'm going to get the side that yeah, like they're going to put something out as an administration, and then these guys are going to criticize it. So now I'm getting both sides of it, right? And I'm going, oh, okay, like it's a little bit more complicated, or sometimes it's not. But it's always just, if you have to lead with that emotion, then maybe there aren't a lot of facts behind it. And then again, if like anytime someone's trying to oversimplify a complex issue, it's like, oh, wait a minute here. Like geopolitics gets pretty complex. So you're saying we just got to do this and that's it? Like, I don't know about that. So those are just ways that I look at it. But big thing is a lot of emotional pull.
Yeah. Well done. Those are all great things to look for and that I will start using today when I start going out and understanding a little bit more of the world around me. So, Brian, tell everybody where they can find out more about you, your podcast, your training, and what you're doing.
Yeah, so you can go to arcadiacognerati.com, which I'm sure you'll have in some of the notes because that's going to be tough to spell. But if you look for the Human Behavior Podcast, and I know you're a fan of ours and sharing our stuff, and I appreciate that. You can check us out on there. We go in depth on a lot of different topics and issues and how they affect you and what it means and kind of how it plays out in the real world. And just so your listeners know, like we're practitioners, not really academics, but we stick to the science, meaning the academics love our stuff because they're like, yeah, you're sticking to what we know. But the people out on the streets, in a sense, love our stuff because we're actually practitioners. So we can kind of bridge that gap on how to read and understand situations. And, I just some basic rules to follow that help you categorize it. So yeah, check us out or reach out to us on LinkedIn too. That's a great spot as well for us to stay connected and find out more. But if you look for Greg Williams or Brian Marren on LinkedIn, and then check us out on all the different social media platforms.
Very cool, guys. Thank you so much for educating me again. I learned from you and learned some historical facts from Greg today. So I appreciate you both. God bless you and what you're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for having us on, Andy.
We love your show, and we love the practical information that's utile, immediately useful, that you're putting out for people. That's why you're never going to get us to say no to come on the show.
And I actually, a lot of people that ask us questions or, stop us, like I actually send a lot of them to your podcast because I'm like, families or people, I'm like, look, because they're like, hey, this is really interesting, but you guys are talking about some really technical stuff, or this is only for this community. I was like, go listen to this to your dad. He's putting out great things. Here's the tip. Exactly. Here's the problem I'm seeing. Here's a tip for it. Parents do this, and it's all such good takeaways because I use it too, right? Because I got same thing. I got kids growing up. But so we're a huge fan of what you do, Andy.
I appreciate that, guys.